When you have something in your life that elicits such a strong emotion that you can go back there with just a thought, or maybe sometimes it's a scent that you pick up on, or really just any little thing, and just that quickly you're right back in that space, in that emotion, and it feels like it's just happening. And maybe it's something really embarrassing that you did, or an anxiety of a particular really awkward encounter, or grief. For me, grief is the big one. And most of the time, all I have to do is actually think about it. And like I said, those emotions are just there, like they were the very first time in that moment when it happens. Anyone else? I want to talk about it. Welcome back to Soulful Wonderings, the space where we search for meaning in everyday life and honor the lessons that help us grow. I'm Heather, and I'm your host. I guess before we get started, let me kind of apologize. Pardon me for my raspy, getting over a cold voice that I have today. But I think we've got it mostly stable, so we will continue with today's episode. I also want to remind you that if you would like to subscribe to our podcast, we would love that. You can also head over to our socials and follow us there, and we will put all that information in the show notes. So back to it. I guess I've been talking a lot about the holidays and things like that lately, but this is just a really difficult time of year for so many people, and there are times, at least when I'm one of them, I think. And I find it interesting, the things that can trigger us in our lives. And the holidays in particular seem to be full of those things, those triggers, right? My mom died in April of 1993. So when I say it's been a while, I'm not joking. And most days, now at least, I do okay. The pain and the grief, they're just not front and center anymore, as they were, especially when it first happened, and really for many years after. But that doesn't mean that it's gone. It doesn't mean that it doesn't circle back at times, sort of find its way back into my life and into my forefront. Have we talked about the fact that grief is not linear? I think we have. We'll check a former episode for that. But the reality is grief comes and goes, and it will do that, truthfully, for the rest of your life. Now, I'll admit, now that I know I can still communicate with her, that does make it a little easier at times. And I think I've talked about the fact that it took me a hot minute to be able to do that. I was actually a few years into this journey, knowing that I had that ability, before I actually could really get to her. I feel like people that are really close to you, for me at least, those are a little harder. It's like, I don't know, I think there's an ego block there, an emotional block there, that I struggled for a long time, for me to be the one that was connecting. But all that being said, when we got to the first Christmas without her, I didn't know any of this. What I knew is that I had been planning a wedding when she died. I had actually gotten married just a few months later. That my sister had given birth to her first child, well, her only child. So what I was aware of, was that many things had already happened where she was just missing. We did our best, we carried on, and Christmas was no exception. And I've talked about a lot about how she loved Christmas. And the truth is, she was the one that was planning all of that, right? She planned the meals and the presents and all the things. And I truthfully, before she passed, I had never cooked any of the dishes or anything like that were staples for us in our household. But like all the other things that we talked about and all the other things that would come up, we moved forward, right? We said, okay, Christmas is coming. Let's, everybody put on a good face. You know, we all tried to make the best of it and make it an enjoyable experience, even though she wasn't there. And one thing that is a big deal in our house is cornbread dressing. And that was one of the things I really remember about that year. You have to understand, we loved her cornbread dressing, all of us, you know. And I can't remember now, but I think there was something wrong with the oven or something happened that was very much not within our control. And so the dressing, it just wasn't right. Okay. It just wasn't right. And I don't remember it being bad per se, but it was just, it just wasn't that great. And of course, I had inherited the perfectionist gene, as had my sister. And most of us were internalizing that something was going wrong. And I feel like, you know, the whole time I'm sure there were several, you know, I'm sorries and apologies and all the things that it wasn't going right. And of course, everyone was polite and they assured us, oh, it's fine. But it wasn't. It just wasn't. And we all knew that. But no one, right? Hear me. No one was going to say that out loud. You know, we were all going through our grief in our own way. And I think we were all mindful of that with each other. And we didn't want to, you know, nobody wanted to hurt each other's feelings. We were hurting enough, I guess. So, you know, everybody's doing this weird, polite thing, which truthfully is not really like us. But I remember a year or so later, I think, my brother just told me one day how it was just awful. He's like, the whole thing, it was awful, you know, and he's like, I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to hurt y'all's feelings. I knew how much y'all were trying, and, you know, everybody was trying, but he's like, it was awful. It was. And he was right. And here's the rub with that, though. It wasn't anyone's fault. It wasn't the less than perfect dressing. The dressing could have been the most perfect dish ever made in the history of chicken cornbread dressing. And the day still would have been off. Okay, so let's be real. Often at the holidays, we are faced with people that, if we were truthful about it, we might just assume they not be there. Or maybe it's okay if they're there if they don't speak. But that's another discussion. But sometimes you wish you want to be around them, but you almost wish you didn't have to be, because there's just so much that comes with it. Am I right? You know what I'm talking about, right? And I'm going to be honest, my family was all pretty normal. You know, my husband's family now, we're pretty normal. But, you know, I hear things from others, and I've seen this at other events. You know, that one relative that goes every year and they ask the obvious questions. You know, well, when are you going to start dating someone? And then you do. And then, well, when are you going to get married? And then you do. And then when are you going to have a baby? And then you do. And when are you going to have another baby? Do you know what I'm saying? It's just like a constant. And maybe it's because they just don't know what else to talk about. But there's just a point where you just get tired of answering the same questions all the time. Is there nothing else we could talk about? And then do you have someone that's always making inappropriate jokes? I think we do that anyway. I don't find that a bad thing. But, you know, there's always someone that is just over the top and making jokes they should not be making, or brings a weird dish that just kind of doesn't fit the theme. Or maybe it's just gross. Nobody wants to eat it. You know what? I may be thinking about the Griswolds with this, but still, you know, there are people out there that have these folks in their lives. I know there is. But this and what we were dealing with that day was not that. Like I said, everything could have been perfect. It could have been, but it wasn't. The annoyance of people is one thing to deal with. It is. It's one set of circumstances and anxiety on its own. But the absence of people, of someone special, of someone that should be there, is a very different ball game. And no matter what we did, no matter how perfect it was, no matter how hard you tried, it just didn't matter. She just wasn't there. It's like making a gingerbread house with no icing. The glue that held us all together was gone. And the hole she left was just immense. And there was nothing you could do to fill it. And everyone felt it. But we got through it. We managed. As time went on, we were more honest with each other. Time helped. It wasn't so raw, so you could actually talk about it. But it was never the same. And of course, after my sister passed, the getting together was harder and even weirder, if that's even possible. And trust me, it is. And then my dad passed, and it just kind of really all fell apart at that point. My brother was really the only family I had left, and we had struggled with a lot of things. That's a whole long story. We'll get into that another day. But he also had his own family. I had my own family. So it just kind of fell apart. So after that, my life became mostly about my in-laws and my own little family. My husband is from a family that's a mix of Cajun and, I'm going to say, East Texas. That's where they're all kind of from. A mix of Cajun and German and all kind of things. My family did more what I would call Southern cooking. And that was really more of what I knew how to do, right? But as time has passed, we had to decide what were our traditions going to be. Because like I said, mine was a lot of sort of Southern cooking. He had some of that. That East Texas thing was kind of similar. But then you had the whole Cajun thing. And you have to start to figure out, what are we going to bring with us from our respective families and from our respective heritages. Heritages? Is that a word? That's a word. From our backgrounds and our cultures. And then what did we want to create that was new? And I know for me, it's always been hard to let go of my traditions from my family. Because here's the reality of that. My mind. The reality in my mind. Letting go meant I was letting them go. That's what my head was telling me. That if I let go of these traditions, if I let go of doing these things, then I'm mom, dad, my sister, all that. It goes away because they're no longer with me. If we stopped having cornbread dressing for Christmas every year, then would I forget my mom and all the things that she did for us? I also, in those thought processes, was trying to figure out, what do I pass on to my son, right? He is the next in line, essentially. And he's bringing both me and my husband, right? So how do I teach him? How do we bring things forward but let other things die? Because it's okay for them to die. The time that they existed and the time they worked for has gone. And sometimes I think we just have to decide which ones are important, which ones mean something to us. Why do they mean something to us? How do they work in our new lives? I think I've told this story before, but I remember I read this in Reader's Digest, y'all. That's a long time ago. They used to put those little stories in there. And this lady talked about how when her mom would go to the butcher, she would always have the end of the ham cut off. Or maybe it was the roast. Anyway, let's say ham. She would have the end of the ham cut off. And so, when she started preparing Christmas dinner the first time, she said her husband to get the, I'm going to go to the butcher, get the ham. He comes home and she's freaking out. Why didn't you get the end of the ham cut off? And he says, why am I supposed to? And finally she says, well, I don't know. Mom always did it. So she calls her mom. Mom, why'd you always get the end of your ham cut off? And the mom goes, well, I don't know. My mom always did it. So, well, they call the grandmother. Granny, why'd you always get the end of your ham cut off? And she goes, because my pan was too small. So sometimes traditions are there for reasons that we don't even understand. And that one always cracks me up because I'm very certain there are things we do kind of the same way, that it was because someone else didn't have the proper pan. Well, I can cook the whole ham. I have a bigger pan. So that's what I mean by sometimes we do have to really visit some of these things and really decide what's important to us and why it's important. All that to say that doesn't make it any easier to reconcile, however. And for us, we had to go through that and we had to figure it out. We had to figure out what it is that we like. What did we want to keep? I'm pleased to say the cornbread dressing is actually a big thing for us. And we do it every Christmas and really no other time. It's not hugely in depth, but it does take a decent amount of work, a decent amount of time. And so it's just not something that we do any other time except Christmas. And that also makes it super special because it's something that we can look forward to every year. And I still use my mom's recipe to make it. We also make a candy that we all like that time of year. It's something that my grandmother used to make for us. And the truth is, I think she actually made it mainly during the summer because I remember her keeping it in the fridge, which we don't do that. But I remember her, it was cold and it was really good. But we make it at the holidays and I actually call it granny candy. I know, really creative, right? But it's just the candy that my grandmother made. And I imagine that this may be at least an inkling of what crack is like, because I'm telling you, you can't keep that stuff around the house. You can't. It's just like a constant, let me go nibble some. It's really bad. And of course, when you buy the ingredients, the packaging comes in such a way that you have enough to make 2 batches when you make it. And a batch is like a 9 by 11, 9 by 13, a rectangle size pan. So it's a lot, so we don't keep that around. We only make it during the holidays. And of course we always bring it to gatherings or parties or whatever that we're going to, because like I said, to us, it's really special. That's the only time of year we make it. Those are the 2 that are probably the biggest for us that kind of survived. I think we talked about in another episode how Santa would come to my house on Christmas Eve, and we do ours Christmas morning. We like that tradition better. That worked better for our son. But what we do is we open our stocking as a little treat on Christmas Eve after we've had dinner. So that's, it's kind of a way of joining both of those traditions. So that's nice. We also try to get at least one viewing of the movie A Christmas Story. That's one of my favorites. And then there are a few other holiday movies that we tend to watch throughout kind of the month of December, I would say. Polar Express. We love Prep and Landing. And I'm not trying to give, Disney a plug, but those little shows are absolutely adorable. If you haven't seen them, you should watch them. And then, of course, some of the old school, what is that, claymation? No, is that how they did it? But the old school animation, Santa Claus is coming to town, Frosty Snowman, all those. I love watching those. And then whatever Peanuts or Snoopy ones are on. Anyway, and the truth is, I would say that we don't have any non-negotiables, that this has to happen. Actually, that may not be true. There might be a revolt if there was no dressing or granny candy. There really might be. I say that, but if there was a real reason, if there was a true reason as to why we weren't doing it, my guys wouldn't hesitate to just do what had to be done. But it's gonna have to be a real reason, y'all. Otherwise, seriously, they gotta have that. And of course, there are still times when you go to make the dressing, so you pull out the cookbook. And she had made me a recipe book where she hand wrote different recipes of things that she cooked that of course I enjoyed. And of course I'm looking at her handwriting and the way it was just so neat, and the little circles, the loops that she made when she wrote in cursive. Just, she had such a unique handwriting. And of course there were little stains on the book from us using it so much. And in a way, that's just so perfect, because it's just a little way to have Mom with me, all those childhood memories. And she would love that recipe book has been put to good use, and that we have made that part of our family. That would absolutely tickle her, make her smile. So even though that reconciliation hasn't always been easy, it has helped me work through grief and actually see what's important. Look at things and say, okay, is this a non-negotiable, and why? And is it a good reason? Like we talked about before. I've also learned that letting go of things that worked for my family doesn't mean they go away, right? I still have those memories, and they're very special to me, and they're part of me. They're part of part of what make me who I am today. And I can share those with my son, even if we don't share those traditions. I can share the memories, and that is just as important. So yeah, some days I open Mom's cookbook, and those stains and that handwriting, it kind of feels like a little hug from her. But how about you? Are you navigating some old and some new? Maybe there's a ritual you could do that would help you focus a bit on what you want to hold on to, what you want to bring in that's new. You could light a candle and say one of your memories out loud. Then name one way you're going to carry that forward this year. But then also give yourself permission to let the rest of it be different. So I would love to hear your version of what you guys have going on in your lives and your traditions. What are things that you do to keep your family close, maybe to keep your culture alive in your family celebrations? Things that you'll pass on to your kids that have been passed on to you. And maybe it's time for you to make some of these evaluations and decide what stays, what becomes more of a memory, what's a funny memory, what's a touching memory. But those are all things that we can decide and still hold on to the love and just how special those traditions and those times that we've had together are. So like I said, I would love to hear what you have going on. Feel free to do that on our socials. Leave some comments and let us know. I would love to hear it. And also what you're doing, if you need to make adjustments in your life right now. I would love to hear what you're doing and how you're making that happen. So as we leave today, I have a blessing for you. May what matters stay. May what's heavy soften. And may the love come through, stains on the recipe card and all.